Welcome to the Nature's Image Farm podcast. We're glad you're here. I'm Greg.
And I'm Susan. And together we're raising 7 kids on the farm and learning life lessons along the way.
So pull up a chair, rest your heels, and let's talk all things bees, homesteading, and the old-time ways.
Let's get after it.
If you're interested in NUCS, packages, queens, or supplies, visit us on the web at nature'simagefarm.com.
Well, hey, guys.
Wow.
Hey, what's up?
Howdy.
Welcome back to another Stream Team Beekeeping Chat. Bruce and Brian, how's it going, fellas?
Going good. How about you, man?
Good.
Pretty good. Enjoying all this ice cold weather. How about you, Bruce?
No ice cold weather here.
Bruce has brood and sunshine and flip-flops. And Brian, what do you have up in your neck of the woods?
We had a wind chill today of, I think we got down to 4 degrees.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Might be a little cool for flip-flops.
Well, I was close to breaking out some shorts. So,
yeah,
you know, close.
Well, I tell you, what's interesting is how different our weather is. Our beekeeping methods, approaches, contexts, scales, goals, dreams, desires, failures, they're all different. And I think that's one of the neat things about what we do as the stream team, individually, and also the folks that we collaborate with. We can all share our honest context, our scale, our experience, and that helps us all kind of glean, learn, and help to put a plan together moving forward for the year. So tonight we're going to be talking about best mite everything. Best mite what? Best mite methods, managements, treatments. There's a lot to this conversation, and we're going to have a special guest tonight to talk a little bit more about this very, very topic. Brian, looks like you've got your very own brand
infested.
new mite friend, huh?
I'm infested. Yeah.
Well, you might go see a doctor about that.
This is like public enemy number 1 right here.
Man, no kidding.
So,
yeah. It's interesting because, you know, it's easy for beekeepers. We can take a look at the life cycle of the honeybee, right? And for the most part, they're 42, 45 days, except for the winter bees, and of course, except for drones and queens. But when we look at the cycle of the bees to try to understand their existence in a snapshot that we can kind of understand, we look at our own existence on Earth as a very limited picture too, and also our experience and existence working with the bees. We only have so many years of continual feedback and information loops and things to use as a reference point as we continue to do the best that we can for our bees. And then what's interesting to think about is, there's an old proverb where there's nothing new under the sun. It's always been something, it seems, with anything on the farm, but especially bees. And as we move forward and try to put together a plan that actually works for us individually, I think there's a lot of information that the folks in the comments, the folks that are listening via the podcast, on the replay on YouTube, but in years to come can come back to a podcast or a video like this and say, okay, here's what these guys were doing. Here's what their scale is. Here's what their context is. Here's what their goals are. And then here's what their mite strategies were. And I think that's an important piece of information because you guys correct me if I'm wrong. I'm wrong a lot, and I'll be up front and say that. But I don't think any of us have a mite strategy that we are 100% happy with. Bruce, are you?
No.
Ryan?
I'm not.
Bruce, what is it, do you think, as we will kind of do some introductions as we lay the red carpet out for Ian to come share his experience with us. Bruce, can you, for new folks who are just tuning into the podcast or checking out this video replay, or if they're joining live tonight for the Stream Team Beekeeping Chat, can you briefly tell us about Bruce's bees, your context, your scale, and your goals in the bee yard, and how you are looking to improve your mite strategy moving forward?
Well, Bruce's Bees has been an obsession of mine now for 10 years, almost 10 years. And it started off with just asking my mother if I could have a couple of hives because I thought it'd be cool. And now as soon as I opened up those hives the first time, it became an obsession for me. And I love it. I still love it. And sometimes it absolutely wears me out, but I've grown up to now where I have, if you mentioned scale, I vacillate between 100 to 150 colonies the last couple of years. I got down a little bit lower than that last year. I had a lot of loss, and which does lead to tonight's topic. I think a lot of that was because of mites, but my goals are this year, I'm going to try to grow significant amount and try to move forward. And I think in my case, I have a hard time figuring out what I want to do when I grow up. And so I'm still trying to get that figured out. But I do enjoy the beekeeping part of it. I enjoy the business part of it. I enjoy this community with the Stream Team and just the beekeeping community in general, the hive life community. And it's just a culmination of all those things that keep me going. But really, we've discussed before the divinity that there is in a beehive, in a colony of bees. Just has to be something divine to me. It's a therapeutic. It's where I feel in many ways close to nature and close to God in many ways as well. And so I'm obsessed with it. I'm passionate about it, and who knows where it's going to take us. I'm also almost equally as obsessed in a lot of ways with the YouTube thing. I'm trying to figure that out, but the bees is the basis for it all. As you say, Greg, the bees are the conduit to the people, and it all just works together in a beautiful fabric, I guess you could say, weaving a beautiful fabric together with this whole thing we're trying to do with the bees, the YouTube channels, and the Stream Team Beekeeping Chat.
That's awesome. I hope with tonight's conversation, future conversations, and another year under our belt, Bruce, that we can continue to, as a collective, get our bees in the healthiest position possible, try to get a better handle on how to exist with these mites, and do the best that we can to just keep pushing our needles in a positive direction. Brian, what about you? For folks who are tuning into the first time on the podcast or the YouTube replay, or if they're listening live tonight, let folks know a little bit about Castle Hives, your context, your scale, your goals, and so far your greatest challenge with keeping mites at bay.
Well, Castle Hives started, it was April of 2017. So this season coming up, 2023, will be my 7th season. I started out, and unlike Bruce, I really don't want to go down the road of becoming a sideliner or even becoming a commercial beekeeper. I more enjoy, I think we've spoken prior, that intimacy and that relationship with the colonies, where if you want to go out and you want to enjoy 5 minutes staring at one frame, you can do so. So, that's more or less, I just want to stay in that hobby realm. I kind of chuckled in the back of my head when Bruce is saying anywhere between 100 to 150. If you take off a 0, that's more or less where I'll be at. So anywhere between 10 and, I don't want to give anything away, but 10 and #Brian15. So that might be what people see this year. Who knows? But you have to stay tuned to find that out. But challenges, it's the topic that we're going to talk about here tonight. It's mite control, just because one of the challenges that I had in my beekeeping journey that I say is, I switched up treatments that I was using that was a little bit effective, and I wanted to change it up a little bit. And I went to a different treatment, didn't fully research it, didn't fully understand it. And the challenge that I was, facing then was losing colonies. So, that was, I think, the greatest challenge for me. It's just kind of understanding, all of those little nuances in managing an apiary.
Right.
So
that's a good point. And I think that's why conversations like tonight are important, if we can better understand how these different products work, when that they're actually effective, and then how to actually apply those in the most efficient manner. That's, I think, what a lot of folks are struggling with. Asking the question, what do folks struggle with the most? There's been just an incredible variety of different answers. A lot has to do with timing, consistency, and knowing that what they're doing is actually effective. I'll quickly, before we bring Mr. Ian Steppler on, as we paint this portrait tonight of this discussion, we've covered who Bruce is, what he's doing, what he's up to with Brian. For us, my wife Susan and I, we have 7 kids. We raise them on the farm. Beekeeping is our farm number one business, and in doing so, we are very honest and candid that we treat bees like a business, and it's an asset that we're investing in. There are returns on those investments. That's just basic business economics. As we've grown the business, we have had no choice but to get more deliberate, as Bruce would say, intentional, but also be very much more in tune with what actually is going on with these bees and what we can do to keep them healthy and producing. And that is a whole long, very long, sad sob story I'll save for another time. But the long and the short of it, we fluctuate somewhere between 200 and 500 colonies, depending on if we've got NUCS out there, queen mating NUCS, production colonies. There's a massive ebb and flow. Our primary goal is raising NUCS and queens at small scale. Just for an example, this year we'll probably raise no more than maybe 1,500 queens at the very most. We might raise to sell right around maybe 200 NUCS, and then we'll just keep pumping production colonies to keep feeding all those and to keep growing for next year. So in no means are we a large outfit, but this is about this is about what it takes to make an income to support a family on the farm. Of course, we have a supply business too, that we provide supplies. We have different revenue streams a part of this too. And that's what makes this work for us. So watching where our dollars are going, paying attention to how much that return is coming back. These are huge things. So tightening up the conversation, tightening up our strategy when it comes to mites is something that we can't overlook. And it's something that we have to put the most amount of time in. It seems like this is the time of planning on the farm where we are planning everything. If we mess up right now, it is very hard to course correct moving on throughout the rest of the year. So I know we've all heard the Ben Franklin quote, but if you fail to plan, then plan to fail. That's exactly where we're at right now. So in furtherance of this conversation of mite strategy, is there a best treatment? It's an absolute honor to bring on our guest tonight, the one and only Mr. Ian Steppler. Ian, thanks for joining us tonight.
7 kids, eh? I'm trying to kick my 5 kids off the internet so I get some bandwidth here.
Well, that's exactly. Well, see, I'm glad someone understands it, because it was 5 minutes before I get on, and our internet is so bad out here in the country. I got one of those. I always forget the name of it, Brian. The
Starlink,
the satellite thing. But apparently, I said, this is how dumb I am. These things don't work if you've got cloud coverage, if you've got bad weather. We're in Ohio. It's always cloud coverage. So now we're scrambling to kick all the kids off so I can get that whopping 6 megabytes a second to get on here on the stream. But 7 kids. The last ones were buy one, get one, Ian. So they were twins. So we would only really be one ahead of you. So it's not a contest. Yeah. But I'm glad you feel us there. Ian, thanks for taking some time tonight to have to kind of go down a rabbit hole in a conversation that is very uncomfortable, and it can be difficult for a lot of folks to be open with. So I appreciate you taking the time to just let her rip when it comes to mite strategy.
Yeah, I appreciate you letting me on just to brainstorm, I guess, if anything. When was the last time I was on here? It's been quite a while, I think. And I remember you asking me, Greg, is what you said, well, what do you do for mite control? And I remember saying, well, I use Apivar, and that's kind of what I use, and I use some oxalic. And then you go into your kind of mite control regime, and I was thinking to myself, man, I really simplified things. Like, things are just too simple. And I was thinking, well, that's fine because it works, right? And if it does, there's no need to change things. But now I'm starting to experience some difficulties with my mite treatment regime. And I'm realizing that I haven't dabbled enough with other products to be able to gain enough experience to be able to implement maybe an alternative product into my mite strategy throughout my entire operation. Like, I'm really struggling right now. I use Apivar in the spring, Apivar in the fall, and oxalic, and I was working for a while. Now I'm finding the Apivar maybe isn't working like it should, and I'm resting everything on the oxalic, and I'm gonna have to start switching things up, which means I'm gonna have to start incorporating formic or thymol or other products like that into my operating scheme. And if I take the mite control at face value for its efficacy, that's fine. I can do that. But I'm really having trouble grasping, or maybe I'm going to be reaching out to you here and some guidance on the casualties, I guess you can say, of using these products. Like, if I'm going to be using formic at certain times a year, what does that mean for the health of my colonies? So yeah, that's what I'm here for, is just to do a little brainstorming, to dig into your base of knowledge.
Well, we appreciate it, because we were talking before you got on, just kind of setting the stage per se, is that we all are coming from different contexts, scales, goals, and even styles, and that's all really important. If those weren't enough factors, we've got different things like weather and maybe strains of bees and windows of opportunity, which is farming. And so what we do in those where there are opportunities is different. And I think I'm hoping conversations like this shed a little bit of light on where there may be potential opportunities for not only us, but folks listening on the podcast, watching this video on a replay, or with us live tonight on the Stream Team Beekeeping chat. It's easy to get complacent and comfortable with what we're doing and expecting a certain result. But and I don't think I have to say I'll be the first one to say this, but when you get something that's working and you're finding 80% success, or maybe it dips down into the 75%, when you're raising bees, you can come back relatively quick and painless. But once you start getting below 80 and down in that 75 or below, as far as what your numbers are coming back out of springtime, it was really affecting your capability and how much momentum you have to grow if you're in a growth phase. And I think a lot of us, Ian, I don't know if you've hit the number where you are comfortable staying and that's where you want to go. I know me, Bruce, and Brian, especially Brian, #Brian15, is we're all pushing it, and we need to have these bee resources to do something with, whether it's a honey yield, whether it's bees, and we can sometimes get stuck and trying to figure all these things out. We can very easily get stuck in just doing what we think is working, maybe having bias to what we think is working, being apprehensive on trying other methods because we hear this or we hear that. And so I'm looking forward tonight, Ian, to kind of digging into some of these different opportunities for mites with just complete transparency. At some point tonight, we do have a giveaway. I'll briefly show that. We've got Mr. Tim Byrne Jr. down in Kentucky has hand forged a one-of-a-kind unique hive tool. The camera does not do this thing any kind of justice, but it has some 3D checkering on the front. Looks like a farrier rasp kind of on the back. it's a beautiful piece of not only art but functional bee equipment. He wanted to make sure that we get that to somebody. He's going to have some more that he's going to donate for Hive Life too. So stay tuned later on tonight as we give that away and talk about a bunch of other things. But Ian, I know you've got a lot of things on your mind, and you are way better articulated with sharing this message. So I think I'm going to turn it over to you and let you start this dialogue and open it up and see where it goes.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to be any bigger than 1,500 colonies. I always say that the honeybees determine what size of operation you're going to run, because if you get a little bit too ambitious, they'll just slap you back to what you can handle. And I'm thinking I'm pretty much at that right now. I have to figure out one very important aspect and that's controlling diseases like Varroa mites. And last fall, I was like, my hives in the shed, don't get me wrong, they're in terrific shape. Like, what do I have in there? I ended up like 1,400 or something like that in the shed, and they're in really good shape. But last fall, I think I was just seeing some warning shots from efficacy problems with the Apivar. Started seeing, like, I'm random testing all the time, so I'm always determining what is going on and if the treatment's working or not working. And for the most part, throughout the yards, I was finding counts 0 to 0.05 or 0.5% or whatever. And then every once in a while I'd have this high expression mite hive right out of the middle of nowhere, and they're testing over 10%, and another one over there, like 25% mite counts within a yard of controlled mite levels. I was like, what is going on here? I wasn't sure what was going on, so I went through and tested more, and I think I'm just coming to the realization that I'm getting to the end of the usefulness of relying on a singular treatment like Apivar, much in the same way maybe we experienced fluvalinate coming through with Apistan. It come to the end of its useful life, and things become resistant. So I'm afraid that what I was seeing in those outliers is going to end up showing up in my entire apiary next year if I don't do something about it. And that means rotation. And there's some beekeepers that'll, like, as a commercial beekeeper, I seem to be focused on chemical treatment for a lot of reasons. One of the most important reasons is because we can seem to control our conditions a lot more effectively. We use acids and stuff like this. You have all these external conditions you got to account for. Otherwise, it causes casualties. So that's why I kind of focus on this chemical treatment all the time. So if I want to start rotating my treatments, the train of thought is, well, bring Apistan in there, or God forbid, check mite, and just change it up as you go. But I don't want to do that because of the synergies with the chemicals itself, I think are going to ultimately be worse than, the solution that they're going to provide. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to look at a rotation that involves more alternative mite treatment. So that brings me to the conversation, which I need to dig into a little bit in regards to using some of these products. I've always dabbled into formic like a long time, and I've got slapped pretty hard. And then I hear beekeepers trying to incorporate this product into their mite regime, and I hear horror stories about maybe not so much a casualty at that point of time, but casualty of the queen or whatever later on, and it compromises their crop, if not compromises the bees going into winter, just because either they didn't use the product right or the product isn't right to be used. So I hear that with formic, and I'm also hearing that with thymol, but I'm hearing efficacy with those two products also. Like the thymol, I've used thymol in the past too, and did it work? I'm not sure, but one thing I do know, that the way I used it, it made the bees very angry towards the queen. So I had more supersedure problems because of it. And also I used it in the wrong time of year, and it seemed to make a small brood nest because I think I shut that queen down too early. So did it work? Did it not work? I don't know, but I was experiencing casualties, and then I couldn't get past that. So then I just relied on the Apivar. So last conversation we had, Greg, you're mentioning that you used Formic, and that's what I want to dig into first off in regards to how did you use it, and did you have any types of rules that you implied to yourself using that product just to avoid some of the problems involved with it? And did you see any efficacy from using that Formic product?
Okay, so my experience with Formic is not in a very positive light. I don't want to blame the Formic itself, but like I said, we've been pretty. I don't want to say happy. We've been pretty. We've relied on other products, but this year, because of the Learning Yard, which is a 5 or 6 hive configuration that we have specifically for hands-on learning for folks, because of trying to show what these other products can do, what the challenges, what the pros and cons were, Formic came into this conversation. So to set the stage for this, the bees that received Formic this year, and this matters. This plays into the grand scheme. These were the bees that got hit by the storm. All the boxes laid open. Those colonies lost upwards of 70% of their population. That just got rained out. After we put the boxes back, the queens were there. They were laying. But one thing that it's really important to have the conversation, at least bring it into it, is that while cold, wet rain kills bees, it 100% does not kill mites. I didn't understand what that meant until now, as I'm replaying the year. But what we ended up with is 30% of our bee populations with 100% of the mite populations, and those colonies were going downhill in a hurry. And it took a little while to start to see that, short of the numbers. So when we were doing washes, Dawn dish soap washes, we were finding astronomical mite counts. And because of how high the counts were, when we're getting into 10% mite counts or percentages, that is well beyond what I'm comfortable, obviously using oxalic and obviously using thymol for towards the end of summer. And so we thought, well, let's go ahead and throw some Formic at it. So we went ahead and did Formic in several colonies. Now, to be very clear, this is a less than 10 colony experiment, but that's not what's important. What's important is the context and how we murdered all these bees, because I think everyone can learn a little bit from that. In those situations, even when we used 1 strip per 10 days, so 2 strips total, once every 10 days, we had complete absconds. They weren't even right away. They were like a month later, nobody was home, nothing. The frames completely cleaned out. In one colony, Brian was there at the Learning Yard. As soon as we applied the Formic, the bees hit the trees. They flew right over the barn, right over the sawmill, and Brian watched them all leave. So that's a challenge. Now, when we applied it, it was 83 degrees that day. And the next, we had one day. So for folks that don't know, Formic has a threshold of 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Ian, I apologize. I don't know what that is in Celsius. But one of the colonies that we were applying this is was an Apame hive, and it was in double brood boxes. We put 2 treatments in above the brood, with another box above it. They had plenty of room, plenty of ventilation. I thought if it does get 1 degree over the threshold, the Apame should help cool that. Long story short, it didn't. Everything that we put Formic on that year ran all the bees out, except for one 4-way pallet. In this 4-way pallet, they were mostly singles or story and a half. They had a super on, and they didn't get hit by the rain. They took 2 Formic pads, no problem. And we got those. We got them cleaned up to 0 to 0.5 mite counts. So context is key, which is why I took the time to explain that.
Is probably the stress that killed those colonies then with the Formic. You're saying,
exactly. And that little detail is going to follow us through tonight's talk, especially when we get into thymol.
So then the colonies that weren't stressed, that didn't get rained out, you said they took the 2 pads, no problem whatsoever.
They did great. Yep. And that was just one 4-way pallet down there in the yard off to the side, experiencing all the same everything. The only difference is a little larger colony. They were in 10 frame singles. that had not got hit with the rain. They still had the population.
Oh yeah. Did you see any queen issues to them?
No queen issues there, but those colonies were just requeened probably 5 weeks before we applied Formic. So they had fresh queens in there.
Oh yeah. 30 degrees is pretty hot too. Did you see mite control from it?
Yeah, we were nearly 2%, and we dropped down to 0.5 with the washes after the Formic, and expect in the 4 ways we did. On the other colonies, I didn't even wash them because, well, there was no bees to wash.
Yeah, Bruce, do you have any experience with Formic?
I've never used it because it's so hot down here. I have
Yeah.
debated about maybe right now. You know, our highs are in the, of course, I don't know what it is Celsius, but our highs are in the 60s and 70s right now. So it'd probably be really an ideal time to use it. I really have not gotten super deliberate or intentional with my mite treatments really until the last year or two. So I'm still trying to figure all this stuff out. But no, I do not have. I've never tried it. I have considered it though. I've heard it's an effective treatment as long as you keep the bees in the box. That's what I've heard. But I've heard horror stories about queens, and I've heard horror kind of like what Greg's described as well. But I agree with you, Ian. It sounds like it may have been related to that stress on those colonies. So if you got a stressed out colony, whether it be from weather damage or just unhealthy, you know, I wonder if that contributes to abscons with Formic. I don't know.
I've been playing around with Randy Oliver's mite modeling, that model he's made where you can plug and play different treatments in, and it'll show the mite expression through the year untreated, and then he'll provide you feedback on whether you put a treatment here, there, and everywhere, and just kind of put different treatments in them. And I'm still using the efficacy at face value, of course. So I'm putting it all in there as if it's going to be like using Formic at 80 or 85% or whatever. I was even using Apivar down to 75% efficacy. So I figured if I was going to do anything, like I'm stuck on a spring treatment right out of the shed, and I'm thinking what I need to do. Well, I guess straight to the point is I'm too scared not to use a chemical treatment right out of the shed, because it's the most important time, if you ask me, of a beehive's development is right out, especially our winters. They're stuck inside for 5.5 months. They are at the end of their rope for longevity, and we get them outside finally, and they have like 3 or 4 weeks to turn themselves into that fantastic spring nest. And I'm afraid if I use a product that's maybe stressful, like Formic or Thymol or something else that gives them undue stress, is this going to deter them or provide a negative environment to get them flipped into spring? So I'm stuck on keeping that Apivar treatment in there, because I do find it is a useful tool to use at that point of time. Like what we need as the beekeeping industry is we need more options is what we need, right? We can't be examining these options that potentially could destroy the colony that you're trying to treat. That's counterproductive. It's just, to me, it's not acceptable. Like in the part of the farm where the grain farm and the cattle farm, we have so many different options at disposal that we can just pick and choose what we need according to the specific environment or the animal or the disease type. It's just, you just match things up to best suit for the bees. Here, I'm thinking about putting acid in there that could really compromise the nest. Like, what the heck? So I think I'm stuck on that Apivar, even if I'm only going to see about 75% or so efficacy right off the start. And I know there's a lot of people in chat who are going to disagree with me. They're going to be like, oh, that's nonsense. But that gives me 52 days of coverage within that point of time through various mite cycles. And then following up after that with maybe something like a Formic, I was thinking. And the reason I was thinking that is later on in the spring, the nest has developed. Typically, I've taken my split already at that time. The hives are all the common strength. I might even be adding a second box if I want to. Do you think a second box would help with the Formic treatment, Greg, or what did you find there?
Yeah, that if there was one thing that definitely seemed to help is the colonies that I had that were successful with Formic They were a really busting single that I either just added a second deep on top, just using them to make bulk bees, or they were in that limbo land where they were a strong single, not quite ready for another brood box, and I just laid a super on top. That configuration, whether it was 2 deeps or just a story and a half, worked out really well. The challenge that you just brought up is one of the hardest things to figure out, because as anyone who farms any piece of ground, whether it's plants or livestock, just like you mentioned, there are parts per million. You are dialing things into your specific scale and need, and sometimes some of these products that we're using for our bees, they're too universal, and I think that's what's getting us into some challenging situations. I know we're keeping the dialogue tonight on labeled, branded products, but there are a lot of commercial beekeepers that are having great success with a lot of the types of acids that we're using, but they're using them in a more self mixed ratios that they're finding great success with. And so there's a takeaway from that too, where if we're trying to use the same formic pad, whether it's 1 pad or 2, there's a lot of gray area here on temperatures, when to place them, and if that is the right dosage for our bees. And that's where this gets to be a very hairy conversation, especially for us who are in this weird part of the country where we try to get a spring and summer flow, and maybe we're too greedy and we try to capture a fall flow too, because it puts us at a great disadvantage, because we want to wait, see what happens. Are we going to hit on a fall flow? If so, then it's like, okay, well, then your formic needed to have been on an April, May, as you're ramping up your summer flow, get things cleaned up then. If you wait too late in the year, it's too hot. And there's a lot of comments here where a lot of folks are saying 80 degrees should really be the max threshold Fahrenheit for formic. And that could be where a lot of us are getting in trouble with formic, is maybe we need to be somewhere in that 70 to 80 Fahrenheit range when we're using these things.
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe that's or go ahead, Bruce. Sorry.
I'd like to see what the results are with, I mean, I know you guys are up north, but with Southern Beekeepers and the formic acid, I just, it just gets so hot here. Like if I was to use it right now would probably be the best time to do it, because it's just, that springtime weather, the 60s and 70s, and we may get an 80-degree day occasionally, and we'll have some colder days in there too, but it's, we're at that point, obviously ahead of you guys as far as timing goes, but I've never even really considered it, just because I know it's so hot here and I've never thought about it much. And I've had pretty good success with Apivar, but I haven't used it for the last, really last year was the first time I was, I've used some Amitraz based products, but the Apivar I've used officially and I've had good success with it. But, maybe we just haven't, I think it's still pretty effective right here in this area, at least with my bees, because it's something new that I've introduced, in recent years. And so, I actually have better luck with the Apivar than with the other applications of a similar product. The Amitraz based products, it just worked well. And so I don't know if I happen to get the strips that were infused properly, or if it was just the bees had not developed, or the mites had not developed a resistance to that yet. So.
I've used formic in the past, and there was a comment here that it said temperature, hive strength, and ventilation are 3 factors. The temperature aspect is one that, if you are not spot on, if you're thinking about using it, you can't look at today or you can't look at tomorrow. You have to look several days ahead. What are the temps going to do? If it's going to swing above 85, don't put it on. It's just as simple as that. And that's the issue that I ran into 2 years ago, is that the temperatures in the fall in Ohio have been fluctuating so much, where we could have perfect temperatures where it's mid to upper 70s and you think it's good. And then we'll have one day where it spikes to 88 degrees. And 2 years ago, I think it was, the last time that I used formic, I lost 2 out of 6 queens. I had colonies supersede, and this was in September. And then by the time they got themselves situated, and that's that critical phase where you should have your winter bees starting, your queen's going to start laying out your winter bees. I ended up, come February, both those colonies were gone because they didn't have adequate population to make it through the winter. So that's why I transitioned to oxalic. Just, you can walk out at any time and you could vape them. But the formic, it's just, it scares me, and then last year when I was at Greg's, like he said, I'm standing in his yard and I hear the bees just fly right over my head. And you're talking 30 minutes after I think the pads were put in. It was literally that fast. So it scares me. That's a product that, honest, it scares me to use it. It does, if it's used in the correct, fashion. You have decent temperatures, you have the ventilation, you have a good colony. When I did use it in years past, you get a heck of a mite drop. It does work, but it's a very sensitive treatment.
Ian,
I like that it does
formic
work. I like that it does work. Part of that comment you made, Brian, and that's important. I was thinking by fixing the treatment of formic maybe at the end of May into June for me, we're still transitioning from spring into summer, so we're not going to see those hot days typically at that point in time. So maybe that'd be a good time to treat the formic just to mitigate the heat issues.
Yeah.
And it might be a good time because I was saying the colonies are of even strength. So things will be a little bit more predictable as we're going through and treating everything the same. So then things are going to be more like-sized and more uniform. So then we're not over-applying or under-applying. And then the possibility of putting that second box on top just to provide a little bit of headspace to buffer that blast right off the start. So I'm thinking that might be a good time to use the formic. One thing I'm getting caught up on, and maybe you can ask your everybody viewing here, is the queen casualties involved with formic. Like I'm re-looking at, I'm hearing, I pulled 10% queen casualty out of the air just because that's what I'm hearing from guys. Is that common? Is the queen death and queen supersedure, like you're talking, Brian, is that regularly common, even on a situated treatment where you have your temperature and your space and your hive strength? Or do you see, like I remember reading an article from Randy Oliver, and he says, no, he's not finding that within his certain study. And he's even testing the product when it's super, super hot. And then you talk to other people and you say there's queen casualties. So that part's got me scared. The brood, I could do with a little bit of a brood damage, even if it takes out, even a week of brood. I mean, that'll come back pretty quick and they'll just bounce back from that. But it's the queen issue that's got me hung up on that also. Because for me as a commercial beekeeper, I'm looking at it. And let's say we do get 85% mite control. That is good. And so that puts me in a good spot going into the summer season for the honey flow. But if I'm going to see queen casualty, that means I got to follow up with some kind of management strategy to fix those problems. So it's going to take me at least 5 days to get through to do the treatment. And then it's going to take me, how long do I wait then? Maybe I wait a week after that. And then we start going through finding all the problems to fix. And how the heck am I going to start fixing those colonies? Do I just drop a queen in there? Or do I, just remove those colonies? Or how do I'm having trouble putting together the pieces and being able to fix all the casualties that fall upon my lap because I use that certain treatment. So that's one thing that has me a little bit tied up in a knot in using that product is the queen casualty.
I wonder if, down here, and even if you read on the package for the Thymol or the Apogard, it says to reduce the dose if it's hot or if it's warm. I wonder if the formic would be as effective if you reduce the dose some and it wasn't as strong against, on the bees. I wonder if that would work.
It's got a pretty big range though of 50. I think as we're talking, I don't wonder if there's some opportunities. Formic, I don't want to say historically, is commonly used in the Midwest as cleanup after the spring summer flow to clean up before the fall time. But I don't wonder if there's potential opportunities to use it a little bit cooler. A lot of us are also requeening as late in the year as possible, after solstice, going into the fall with fresh queens. So one train of thought is, if there is any casualty, if you are at just before harvesting, when you still have time to get your field force brooded out and in the boxes and out in the field, being that formic is branded as an organic acid, outside of price and outside of temperatures, it seems like it may be more suitable during those cooler temps. But you might have to, most folks might have to think about flipping their requeening strategy to a little bit later in the year. But one thing that is interesting with formic, is, and just cruising through NOD's website, of course, you got to have ventilation. Where is it? Somewhere in here, when I was looking at these instructions earlier today, there is a clause in here. I'll have to find that later, but it is saying to be mindful not to mix with other miticides. The reason I say that, Ian, I wonder what your thoughts are on any synergistic relationships between formic acid and any kind of a residue from Apivar or anything else that might be in the wax.
Yeah, well, there you go again. Yeah, like in Hive Life, I think it was, Bob was talking about, or was it Hive Life? He was, oh geez, I've been to so many conventions now. I'm losing track of them. Yeah, I think it was Hive Life. Bob was talking, and he was talking about the synergetic effect of definitely the chemical treatments together. That's why you don't want to rotate the chemical treatments, because it just compounds itself, especially if you have a fungicide come in, it just, right? But also with the organic acids too, there is some kind of a synergic effect upon that. So that's something I'm going to have to talk to Tom Nolan about. He's been after me for a little while to use this product. And, oh, there he is right there.
He brings up a really solid point, because a lot of us have made, I think, some logical errors in the fact that rather than the horror stories with using one pad and murdering queens or running colonies out, we've tried to go one pad for 10 days, one pad for 10 days. I didn't even realize that until today. I'm combing through some of these specifications. That approach, according to NOD, is only to capture the phoretic mites. It is doing nothing, supposedly. It is not the same as just putting one down for that 20-day, 14-day interval with 2 strips is attacking the mites behind the cappings, whereas 2 strips placed 10 days apart, according to NOD, is an attempt to go after phoretic mites. That's a big problem, because a lot of us, I will be the first one to admit, I made a logical error, and I was just assuming it was a softer dose for a longer period of time doing the same work.
Which should be beneficial though, right? Don't you think?
You would think, as long as the potency is enough to where you're capturing capping, uncapping cycles. But what if it's not? If that were the argument, then I think,
if it's, as long as it spans throughout the duration of a cycle and a half of brood,
sure.
it should be exactly. I wonder if Tom would be able to comment then in regards to, and maybe I'm putting him in an awkward spot here, but taking two strips, putting it on as compared to one strip, double the length of time, like one strip and then one strip. Is there does he find an ease on the queen then in that regard, even through the heat temperatures? I'm really concerned about that queen. And maybe I shouldn't be. Maybe those are queens that are on their way out anyways. I had a beekeeper talking to me and said, Ian, you probably want to call those ones out of your operation anyways, because there's probably some kind of, maybe hinging back what you said, Greg, maybe there's a stress problem there and it's killed the queen because it's on its way out anyways. And the beekeeper said the best thing, and maybe look at it as an advantage where the formic maybe flash kills some of that early brood, because when that queen dies, then you can just drop another queen in there and not worry about emergency cells screwing things up.
So for folks listening back to the replay here, Tom Nolan, Hivetown, makes a comment: under ideal conditions, you may get some penetration under the cap with 1+1 method. but 2 strips will kill below the cap.
I want him to comment on the queen issue. That's the one that I want him to mention. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah. So anyways, that's kind of my thought process around the formic, and I'm extremely interested in bringing it in. And I missed the opportunity. I should have took like 2 years ago, and I should have taken a yard or two and started playing around with this product just to be able to teach myself how to use it and what conditions I can use it in, and just the casualty that might become of using that product, and have that experience at hand before now I have to do it on an operation base and tap into other people's experiences and stories, right? So lesson be learned on that part, but I guess it's not, better learn at the present than not at all, right?
Ian, is it possible, and I'm obviously not at the scale that you are, but would it be possible to try some different treatments in different yards and just see which works best? I know that that's taking a risk, but instead of trying to go operation wide, if you just took a certain percentage of colonies and went with your traditional, maybe a third, and a third, and just tried some different things and just see what the success rate would be.
Yeah, and I think that leads into thymol product, which I have I do have experience with it, but it wasn't a good one. But I didn't use it enough to be able to gain enough experience to know what I was actually seeing. Do you guys have any experience with thymol?
Bruce?
Well, this was my first year ever trying it. I've always just been a amatraz base. I've used to just be OAV, and then I realized it wasn't working. I just learned the information or the data that it doesn't work under the cappings, and it's really somewhat ineffective, very ineffective when there's brood in the colony. I think it can, OAV can keep the mites in check, I've heard, but they can't reduce the number, so to speak. And so I used to just do that. Then I started adding some Apivar amatraz type products into the mix. And then this year I had some real mite problems, some issues with some of the traditional treatments I had done. And summertime, when you pull the honey off here, is very difficult down here in the South on the bees. It's just a horrible time. And the mites are reaching their highest point right when we go into an immediate dearth, when the honey flow ends about mid-July here. And so for about a month and a half, it's just miserable. And that's when I lose a lot of colonies, late July, August, September. But so this year I tried my traditional method using the Apivar / Amatraz type products. And some of the products didn't work as well as I had hoped. So I was kind of in desperation mode in October here. It's still quite warm. I guess it was actually late September, October. I tried the Apigard for the first time ever, and it was still warm enough. It was right on the border of being too hot, or cold to do the full dose. And on the packaging for the Apigard, it says if it's above a certain temperature, I can't remember what that is. It 77 degrees? Is that it? What is the temperature? I think it's 77 degrees to do a half a dose, and to kind of play around with that. And so I did that. What I did was I did 2 half doses a week apart. And then I did, and the temperatures cooled down. And so I did one more dose, a full dose, and I left it on there for 2 weeks and then removed it, and had pretty good success with that. I didn't see the great big issues with them stopping laying. They continue to lay pretty well. Didn't see a lot of issues with health of the colonies, but now it is October, so it's fall, so they are starting to breed back a little bit anyway. So I don't know, maybe they had brooded back, or maybe they did a little bit more than I anticipated. But I didn't see a lot of issues or problems with it, and it was pretty effective. I had just a couple of colonies that it wasn't super effective, but by that point in time, the brood is way down here, and so I started hitting them with oxalic acid, and I've hit them pretty hard with that, and so I think my numbers are pretty good right now. But I personally would not try Apigard or Formic Pro in Alabama in the summertime at all, because it does get extremely hot, extremely humid, and it's miserable here. And I think either one of those treatments would be too much unless I tried a half a dose of the Apigard. I know some folks locally, some commercial guys, I think down in the Panhandle of Florida, have been having issues with the effectiveness of some of the products they've been using. And so I know at least one of them has told me he used Apigard in the summer, half dose, like I discussed, if I'm not mistaken, and had real good success. And so I think you just gotta, I think you just really have to deal with the temperatures. That's my very minimal, brief experience with it, using it one time this past fall.
How about you, Greg? Have you found that it cuts back in the brood laying at all?
Severely. And again, folks who are listening to the Nature's Image Farm podcast, the question asked earlier to Tom Nolan about the queens, he suspects 1 + 1 would be easier on the queens, but his experience is that 2 strips does not really experience queen loss. So I wanted to get that comment in there. That's a big deal.
Yeah, and there's science behind that too. I mean, Randy Oliver, like, he's take him at face value. He gives you what he sees, and that's what he sees too. He says, Ian, there's no queen issues that I can find, or no. I'm talking like I'm talking to him, but it's through, media and that. But it's something that is out there, though. Like, there's experience out there that it is an issue. So I got to figure out what is causing the situation that's causing these queen losses. If it's just straight up temperature, or if there's some other situation at the time these beekeepers are applying these products, and what are they doing as they're applying these products, or maybe it's a synergy with something else that we're not aware of. What's going on that's causing some of these casualties? It's something. Tom's probably just rolling because he's, we're talking about his product and we're throwing all these variables out there, and he's probably wondering whether or not we have enough data behind what we're talking about here. But maybe as I proceed this summer and try to use some of these products, maybe he can help me guide through some of these issues to make sure that I use it appropriately. The guidance is a big thing, I see.
Sure.
I think, especially with all these beekeepers using off-label products. They're using these products without the guidance of study behind them, or guidance of the application or the medium or all these other conditions, and they're almost in their own trying to navigate all these murky waters where registered products come in. It's been tested. There's science around the process and everything involved in trading, and you have the people providing you the assistance to be able to use these products appropriately. So anyway, that's just because there's some I'm just hearing hints of off-label here, but there's also off-label in regards to oxalic, and it's highly promoted, and it's effective in some places, it's not effective in other places. And there's all these questions, well, what is going on? And the matrix we're using to be able to administer this product, there's variances and differences everywhere. So there's a lot of places I think our industry needs some help here. But anyway, I stepped on you, Greg. I'll let you carry on.
Well, it's beautiful how everything is continually tied together once you can look at it that way. I am not a guy who believes in coincidences, but today I wanted to reach over to this stack of magazines that I have, and this one here is of Gleanings in Bee Culture from May of 1965. It was literally a random woo alert. It was a random snag out of this entire stack over here. Okay. And the first page that I flipped it open to is this. Let's see if I can. Bees die
of unknown causes.
Okay. Now this is May of 1965. We say it all the time. It's in Proverbs. There's nothing new under the sun. We'll maybe read this later once we get through all this conversation if we have some spare time. But in conclusion, they don't know. They're trying to figure it out. They were calling it a spring dwindling, where hives are dying out in the wintertime, or they're not worth a hill of beans in the spring, and they're trying to figure all these things out. I think it might have had something to do with pesticides, might have had something to do with viral loads, but I'm reading this and I'm getting goosebumps because it's a lot of the things that we talk about now, these unknown factors. We're trying to put these strategies and plans together, but the fact of the matter is there is so much else going on that even the slightest little nuance can create a potential synergy or just compound the result one way or the other. So that's something to keep in mind. We'll touch back on that later. But Ian, regarding thymol, thymol in a lot of ways has been a saving grace. I've learned a lot. I've learned how to kill bees with formic. I've learned how to kill bees with thymol. I've learned how to murder bees even with oxalic acid, and we can talk about that as the conversation develops. With my experience with Apigard is using it in the tubs, using it with the syringes, 50 gram or 50 milliliter doses right from the syringe on a card. Folks are pretty familiar with that. No new territory there. But what I had found is the name of the game for us is thresholds. And so if I'm in somewhere that 2 to 6 range, I'm pretty okay with thymol and oxalic acid historically. I had a happy little accident, as you would say, and never got my thymol cards off, my Apigard cards off last winter. It was last winter, Brian, or the year before. I can't remember now. But anyways, the crystals stayed in the colony all year long. And according to Apigard VitaB, thymol works because the thymol is suspended in gels. The bees get it on their hairs, on their bodies. They carry it through the colony. And what's interesting to think about is that according to Apigard, as opposed to other pyrethroids, thymol disrupts cell membranes and affects all cellular performances. That there's no resistance yet found to it. It's operating differently than some of the neurological or systemic approaches from some of the other products. Why does that matter? Well, I have a theory. I have field experience that shows me the colonies that I accidentally left the cards on, which is obviously anti-label, all those, I had 100% survival rate on those colonies. The colonies that I either A, pulled cards out of, or B, didn't get cards, they didn't make it. But it was a step, it was a ladder. The ones that only got oxalic, I had this survival rate. The ones that had oxalic with the cards pulled were at here, and the ones that had repeat oxalic and thymol were nearly 100% survival rates in those yards. And to me, that was a happy little accident, because I'm trying to figure, what does that really mean? Were my numbers too high going into the fall? Did that somehow keep just running them out? However, as good as that might sound, I murdered 120 NUCS in my nuke yard that I was overwintering for spring splits. You do the math on small scale, NUCS that are in 5/5s that you can split out into 240 NUCS for sale at $200 a piece. It's a pretty significant loss at our small scale or any scale. In that situation, I think the Apigard 100% ran those colonies plumb out of those boxes because they were complete absconds. Why that matters is in the learning yard this year, in the same yard, the same bees that were stressed by formic, on 2 of those colonies, we put Apigard in. One of them, they completely absconded within 2 months. There wasn't even any bees that made it to Christmas. They were completely gone. Those bees were too stressed. So it keeps going back. Bees that are highly stressed or might be affected heavily virally, when we were throwing these things out to clean up later, I think it's just too much. They are absolutely they're heading for the hills. They're out. So thymol has been extremely effective for us. At the same time, we have found the line where Apigard, even at smaller dosages, quarter doses, ran the bees out of those NUCS, 5-frame deep singles and 5-frame over 5-frame deeps. We had very terrible results with it.
Did you use the same dose on the NUCS as you did on the singles?
The doses were cut back. I think we did it per frame. We took on average a 5-gram dose per frame for a single to get us to 50 on a regular single. I think we were shooting for 14 to 18 milliliters on the NUCS. So a pretty low dose, very low dose, even lower than what it recommended at. I think, don't hold me to it, I think they recommend 25-gram doses on smaller colonies. And a lot of these instructions are challenging because you don't find it on their website. These instructions for lower dosages is on the bucket on the pull-out tab. So
yeah, that's not acceptable. I mean, that's tremendous casualty. That cost a lot of money. That's what I'm scared of. Just exactly that. And you can't say that's misapplication because you were following the directions on that accordingly, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So that's tough.
Well,
what
no,
conditions?
no, I wasn't. Yes and no. No, because where we went a little sideways is they also got oxalic acid 4 days later. So there might have been a combination of miticides, if we want to call it a miticide, a combination of oxalic acid and thymol within the same window that ran them out.
Son of a gun. It might be a synergy then going on there.
Could be. However,
that's something we need to know.
I would say here's where I'm on the fence with that. The other, I can't even think of how many 4-ways we had out there that we did. Let's just say on average 100 colonies that we treated with oxalic acid same day that we applied thymol, and came back 4 days later and hit them with oxalic, and came back 4 days later and hit them with oxalic. So we had 3 oxalic treatments with a 50-gram dose on these singles. Those colonies that I did that to, and that the thymol card stayed on, was nearly 100% survival. So in those instances, at that size box and that configuration, there was not a synergistic issue as far as me looking at it as a farmer in the field and reading the critter. But when we get into nuke boxes, it's different altogether. Somehow, even the same frames of bees stacked up vertically, something different's going on.
Hey, Greg, was it all at the same time of the year?
It was same exact time. Yep. Same time, or the same. They were all splits that we had made for all intent and purpose. I mean, identical sets of bees. The only difference is they were 2 miles, or about 2 miles away, and the box configuration was really the only difference.
Yeah, so that's no good. I'm thinking of using thymol. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm scared of it affecting the brood nest. Like, okay, I'm pretty much set on my formic treatment. Tom can buy me supper. I'm going to buy formic to be able to do my June treatment, because I'm getting kind of married to that thought, just because it's a different swing of a hammer. There's going to be casualty. I'm just going to have to deal with it. I'm hearing, like, I have all this horsehair I'm hearing, but I'm hearing positive effects of using formic. Just the colonies seem just to, afterwards rebound and produce. There's something about it. Maybe it spurs on the hygienic nature within the nest, or I don't know what's going on, but they just seem to produce these fantastic brood nests after they tell me, and it's just off to the races. Another hammer being swung at that mite, and there seems to be less mite issue from the beekeepers I'm talking to, less mite issue with this product worked into a Apivigard or some other type treatment and down the line. So the rotation is true there. So I think I'm going to try to get my experience and bearings around that to incorporate it. So then after that, in the summer, leaving the summer, I'm hoping to be able to use an extended oxalic acid release pad or towel or whatever, and hopefully we have it approved up here in Canada so I can legally use it. And it's going through the regulatory process right now, and it was promised to us this spring, and then things are being delayed, and not sure if it'll be ready for the summer, but maybe it'll be ready for later in the season, I hope. And if I can, then maybe what I'll do is I'll use the extended release oxalic right when the boxes come off, just to try to hold those mites down through a very critical point of time where those hives are building that brood nest for winter. And I say that I don't want to put a product in like formic at this time, because we get variability and heat swings, and I don't want to have the casualty because of that. And I don't want to use thymol because of my experience of making a small brood nest. I want that queen to keep brooding and not to retard that brood nest, right? So that's maybe where I could put this oxalic extended, and then maybe go into a thymol treatment later on in the fall, let's say in October, when things are a little bit cooler. The brood nest, the winter nest already established itself, and this is the point of time maybe I could target those mites and take advantage of the effect of it shutting down the queen, because this is when I want the queen to be shut down. So if I could put that product in, use it, a two-edged sword, one to kill the mites, two to completely cease brood rearing. So then I can follow up later on in October or in close November before I bring them into my building with complete broodless nests, and I can get them without oxalic acid vapor or dribble at that time. I was having trouble this last fall. Some of the variability I was finding was, I think it was directly related to the mite infestation within my colonies. And I was finding that the colonies that were healthy, that had very low mite counts, were broodless late in the season, and my oxalic acid vapor treatment seemed to knock a lot of mites, or not a lot of mites down, but it seemed to, there's mites on the board. It's kind of like cleanup, but there's no brood there. And my tests were predictable. The washes were predictable. But as soon as I got into hives with more mites, it seemed like those colonies started rearing more brood for some reason. I'm not sure. There seemed to be a correlation between mite especially the one I walked into at 25%. It's like, whoa. And there's a frame and a half of brood in there, open brood. And I come back a little bit after, took a white mite wash, and I only counted like 5% of because those mites went underneath the brood cappings again. And it's not like that situation isn't helping the bees. It isn't helping their mite situation, because we're not able to target those mites later on. So if I can use that thymol to knock that brood nest off, so then I can more predictably treat those mites without any brood in the colonies, I think they'll be better for it in that way. Does that make any sense to you?
It does. And I think that's what we are seeing here too. There might be a slight caveat to consider. We have really put a lot of focus on Caucasian genetics. And so they on their own are already kind of downsizing going into the fall. So when we hit them with thymol in the fall, they're already downsizing on their own. I don't worry about that a whole lot, because I've got colonies that can overwinter in 2-3 frames of bees and come out beautiful and explode and be profitable, prolific colonies. If I was running something, and I don't want to get into this race is better than that, but if I got into a bee that required or wasn't going to stop, or they couldn't be as frugal with the resources, I might be a little concerned with shutting them down, unless there's this fine line. And what I've found is throughout this year, luckily my wife Susie and the kids, they can get out there with our instant vapes and they can just start blasting the colonies. If we're at like 0.5 to 1.5, what worked really well for us is keeping them static with oxalic acid until we got them to the point in time where we could put something a little bit heavier on. That really helped us continue to make the splits, keep everything healthy, and then have no fear of knocking the brood down. The last thing in the world that I want to do in June is put thymol on and have my brood crushed, or my queens start to shut down for even 2 or 3 weeks, because that's what our focus is making so many bees out of the bees that we have. We can't afford that. So there's this weird balance. It's going to be different for everybody, but I'm also, as we're talking, entertaining the idea of potentially using formic when it's cooler, like you, and then following up a little bit later in the year for what we're doing, going static, using OA vapor to keep them static, and we're monitoring constantly. The thing about the thymol that I also like going into the fall is, while yes, it does shut the brood down. I am 100% sold on it, because I've seen it so many times over and over and over again. Use that to our advantage, get the brood shut down. And then for me, cleaning up with oxalic acid is so quick. It's so easy. And then especially right at solstice, zap them again. To me, there's for the dollar and cents for what I'm getting out of it, it makes it, to me, like I'm pretty convinced. And that could be a problem too, but it seems to be working out really good. The trouble spots are coming out of the spring to make sure that everything is good to go. And then that really critical time in the summer, as we lead to the fall, at the right time, putting the right product in to make sure our bees are healthy and ramping and doing what they need to get into that fall establishment. What concerns do you have, Ian, with, outside of, let's say, outside of price points, right? Because that's a whole other conversation. When it comes to losing a colony, to me, it doesn't matter if it costs $3 a colony or $7 to keep them alive. That's a no-brainer. But what considerations do you have coming out of the spring and timing of these products? Is this where what is why are you steering away from Apigard, or I'm sorry, Apivar so many times in a row, and you're thinking about plugging that different hammer in?
Well, yeah, in the spring, our season, I think we're very familiar with our climate type between you and I, Greg. I think we're somewhat the same, except I would say I'm a little bit more condensed like this. I think I maybe don't have maybe quite the freedom. Like we're talking freedom, I mean, like a couple of weeks of freedom, where you can maybe apply something else and then get forgiven because things will fix itself. In the spring, we're just so cold and slow sometimes, and we need to be able to use a treatment that's easy on the bees and just like almost foolproof. Put it down, kills the mites, and let that work. It has to be like that. There's we need a product first thing in the spring. It's so very important to use it where all these complicating variables don't affect what's going on. That's where the beauty of Apivar is, or a chemical treatment like that, because it fits the mold to that. It doesn't, it decreases the amount of mistakes the operator can make to be able to fulfill the proper treatment of that, if that makes any sense. So that's in the way I'm married to that type of treatment right out of the shed, because it's so very important how you set that nest up for not only that spring, but for the summer. And if you have escalating counts because you didn't do your job in the summer or in the spring, then you're going to have a heck of a time controlling those counts going down into fall. So spring is probably one of the most important times of treatment. And I focus on that. And so I'm going to be using the Apivar again, just because I can't see any other treatment other than just compounding, hitting them with oxalic acid in the spring. I just don't trust that. So I'm going to have to use a product, even if it's 75% effective or whatever. I got to use that. But that's where the formic comes in after, is maybe to fix the problems that haven't been fixed by that first one. So I don't know what to do about that. But I was just talking to a beekeeper before I come on here about about nutrition, actually. And he was, before we're on Zoom and before we hung up, he's saying, I got some feedback for you, Ian. I watched your last video, and he said, do you mind if I tell you straight up of what you're doing wrong? And I said, well, give it to me. I love it.
Do it. Yeah, of course.
So he said a lot of the beekeepers in this area, they just use oxalic acid vapor in the fall, and then maybe another supplementary treatment in the spring. He said, you said in your video that you're having trouble with efficacy and consistency and all this kind of stuff, and you're leaning away from vapor. He said, don't be an idiot. Vapor gets the product in there very quick, and it's affordable, and it's effective. He said, you're not using it properly. And I said, okay, well, teach me. He said, what you're doing is you're getting the product in there with, he doesn't care what type of device it was. You get it in there. But he said, you're making a big mistake by not closing up the entrance. And I said, well, what's the importance in that? I said, I'm using a 4-gram treatment just for the waste, because I expect some waste to come out. But he's saying, well, what you're doing is, he said, I watched your videos. He said, you're blasting it in, but it's blasting out as fast as it's blasting in. You're not keeping the product within the cavity of the colony. Yeah. In the envelope. You got to treat it and trap it in there so it doesn't have any place to go. So then it secures itself onto the bees, onto the cluster, and penetrates and does what it's supposed to do. So he said, even though you're overdosing a little bit, it's all going out the front anyways. And he said, when those bees hate it, and you see it when you vape a nest, they'll fan and they'll try to get it out. He said, that's not helping you either. You need to close it up and trap it in there. And he said, then you'll find that you're going to get more consistency out of your product. And maybe he's right. And I'm thinking about that. Yeah, because I'm not closing my entrance up because it has been advised, and I'm doing it just because I think I'm managing or mitigating the situation by increasing my dose. Right. So I'm going to maybe fall back on pulling out the vapor treatment and try with maybe a little more. And my boxes, my goodness, I need to improve my boxes.
Oh, that's
be some investment there, right?
Hey,
but maybe it's something I got to do.
Yeah. Ian, how much brood is in those colonies coming out of the shed?
there's an opportunity there too, Bruce, because there's very little coming out of the shed. And I used to argue zero, but that's not right. There's just a little bit. There's winter brood, and it's not something that you'd recognize as a brood frame, but there is brood. It's just kind of shotgun patterned like this all over the place. Once
Sure.
they get out, that queen goes to town, and then she starts laying her brood nest. So we have about a week before we get them out.
So have you? I mean, like, so OAV is pretty mild, isn't it, on the bees? So would that be a time, or maybe you do it already to hit them with OAV as soon as they come out when you drop them, or it
We
might be?
probably should, and we probably could, but there's that time thing. Maybe I need
Yeah.
to hire another 2 guys to help, because it takes about 4 days or 5 days if we're,
Okay.
you know, and it's cold, and we only have about 4 or 5 working hours in the spring. Like
Oh,
what I was trying to get at earlier was our spring is condensed, and it's not favorable to
Yeah.
those types of treatments. I feel, I don't know, it's just hard. Whereas
yeah, I
if,
know.
treatments later on in the fall, things are a little bit more predictable, maybe a little freer, more bees, more warmth, more opportunity and everything. But in the spring, like, we're in snowbanks still, and it's just,
Yeah, it's tough.
yeah, it's just awkward. It's not
Greasy and
natural.
muddy, and it's one,
Because I,
last thing you want to
I,
do. Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
just pondering hitting them with OAV if possible, and then maybe putting the Apigardia or Apivar in there. I don't know how quickly you could do that, if that would have a cumulative effect or not, but just a thought I had. I didn't know.
Yeah. And then we're putting patties on at the same time too. It's like,
Yeah.
I do need more hired guys. I put it all on Carrie's shoulders before the school kids come.
It's just a
Well,
lot of work. It's just a lot of work. Yeah, for sure. It takes time
that's
to
a
do every
big
bit of
deal.
Yeah.
that.
That's, you laugh about it, but one of the biggest contributing factors to us losing less bees really hasn't been dialing in perfectly which products we use. It's being consistent with whatever it is that we're actually using. When my wife Susie and the kids go out and they're out just nailing those colonies every 4 days, even early spring, I really do think it makes a big difference. But there's a lot of time, truth be told, that you get into certain parts of the year and you are just struggling to just keep your face above the water, and you can only do so much. And I think a lot of my history of not intentionally letting things slide, but there are too many irons in the fire. You can't get to all the colonies. You can't do all the things that you want to do, and so you're in a constant evaluation of, okay, what's critical, and then work your way down the list. Ian, so you've talked about coming out of the spring, maybe you'll hit them with OA. You're going to put your Apivar in there. Apivar is something that I have some experience with, meaning I've seen it in many commercial yards. There's been a lot of hesitancy on a lot of us putting faith in it because of whatever rash of concerns a lot of folks had over the last 3 years with concentrations. But overall, what are the cons that you see other than a potential resistance or a potential synergy with anything else? What are the cons that you are seeing with using Apivar, if any? Any brood loss?
Yeah, no, I don't
That's
see
beautiful.
anything like
Yeah.
that. I do see, yeah, that's actually not true. I do see one thing coming out of the shed. These bees are stressed. They've been inside for a long time. They're ready to fly. They're ready to void. I set them down in the yard. They make their spring poop. They go out and fly and they cleanse themselves. I find the time when we get through and drop the strips down to the colonies that they get really shitty all of a sudden. There's like, they got to relieve themselves again. And I think that's a stress thing. They probably are stressed from the chemical that we're putting into the colony, and they're just doing the same thing as any other animal would when they get stressed and they go out and they poop, right? So I don't know, maybe that's what I'm seeing, but I do see that. And in a stressful year like we had this last spring, where it's cold and draggy and just the winter would not end until midway through May, it seemed. I held off on that, the Apivar right off the start, because I was afraid of exactly that. I had a lot of canola honey in my nests, and the bees are very shitty, and they're just doing unusual things, and I didn't want to add that extra stress to them at their most vulnerable point of time. So there's a lot of factors went around why I didn't get my Apivar in time, but that's one of them. Is I just dragged my heels to put it in a little bit later, just to help them get through a very stressful point in time. So that is one thing I find. Yeah, and just to comment on another thing that you mentioned. Oh, just lost my train of thought. It's all about manpower, and maybe I'd be able to, I have 1,500 hives. I feel I'm maxed out, and I try to get a little bit more, and the bees slap me down to 1,200 or whatever, and I build myself up because that's where that's my place. Well, maybe if I just hire some more employees right off the start, it'd help me get my work done. So then my bees stay alive, so that I can keep a little bit more colonies. Right. That's a dynamic that we have to sort out ourselves. There's all these things we got to figure out. Right. So yeah. You look at that before I go. I'll let you guys get back to your live here. I kind of dominated a lot of the conversation, but you look at Randy Oliver's mite model. And this is what the beekeeper told me too before I got on with you guys talking about mites. You look on there and you give an oxalic acid vapor or drizzle, whatever, it knocks them down. Let's even say 80%. So you come down, hit them a second time. You're killing 80% of the 20% that's residual in there, and you hit them a third time in there, you're knocking that 80% of the residual of that 20% of that other 20%. You know what I mean? So then that escalating kill off going into winter, you've absolutely almost controlled all your mites going into winter. And that's a very important aspect, especially here trying to keep bees inside a winter shed for so long. If you have any mites on the bees, lights out, right? So we need to keep our mites at pretty much zero, but also it starts you at a very healthy number in the spring. So then the progression of the mite expression throughout the year starts almost at zero again, and they have to build themselves up. So then your continual mite treatments are more effective all the way through. So that late season oxalic is a neat trick. And I think just going to have to play around to make sure that we actually get that to work properly. Right. So, yeah.
Ian, I appreciate you taking some time to talk to us about some of these ins and the outs, why some of these things work, when an appropriate time, why they may or may not be feasible in all our own operations. It makes a huge difference as we all kind of develop our own strategy for our individual apiaries. Guys, do you have any questions for Ian before we cut him loose?
I had a quick question with regards to the OAV. I think we touched on it a little bit, but down here in the South, honestly, we never go. Some colonies do go completely broodless, but a lot don't. Most colonies don't go completely broodless. So my question for you is, with oxalic acid vapor, if you treat them, like you mentioned, hitting them 2 or 3 times, I think, if you hit them several times, like in a 3 to 4 day intervals, if you can, even if you hit them 4 or 5 weeks in a row, 5 to 7 days apart, do you think it's possible to knock the mite load down doing that? Or do you think it's just going to hold them at bay? If there's not even a lot of brood, but just some brood in the colonies. People always say if there's brood, it's not effective. But I don't know that I believe that 100%. I know that it's not going to kill all the mites. I understand that. But if you hit them at a certain frequency, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting comment. I don't exactly know how to answer that, just other than my own experience. And I think I'm pretty sure it was Randy Oliver tested exactly that. It took multiple treatments to be able to get that mite count down. And I can relate that. I can kind of see that just by what I've seen this last fall in the mite migration between no brood. Like when I come upon this 25% mite count colony, there is no brood other than a sheet and a half of open brood. And I come back in a few days to do another sample on it. And that brood started to cap over. It went from 25% down to 5%, just like that. So those mites migrated underneath those cappings. So that's telling me there's a lot of mites under those cappings at all times, right? And when I first brought oxalic acid into my mite treatment regime, It's the first time I've ever used it because I was seeing initial problems with Apivar at that time. I didn't know what else to do. So this neighbor of mine had one of those great big California cannons, and he didn't know how to use it. It wasn't working. He said, even if you can get this thing to work, you can use it. Just show me how to use it after. So I took and I figured it out. I blasted those bees. And that first round I made, it didn't make any difference on my mite counts. And I looked down, and I said, well, this is disappointing. So I looked down at the nests, and they still had brood within the clusters. So I thought, okay, maybe what I'm seeing is a mite drop, but my mite counts are staying static because this winter brood is emerging, and I'm seeing those new mites coming through. So then I waited a week, I think it was a week and a half or so, until I was confident that there was less brood in there, did a round, and I knocked my mite counts right down to 1, right? So what I'm trying to say is I think brood is a big factor when you're trying to use oxalic acid. And I always said, you got to do it when there's no brood in your colonies. And that's one of the reasons why I'm thinking maybe I could employ a strategy with thiamol, which might, bring that colony, cease its brooding because of that treatment, which will provide more of a consistent brood nest throughout my entire operation as I'm then trying to target it with oxalic acid vapor. Because maybe that's one of the reasons why I'm seeing inconsistency with vapor with my mite shakes and my treatments and everything, just because there's probably brood in there I'm not seeing throughout the treatments, So I hope that answered your. That's just a lot of rambling conversation around the question.
Well, I will tell you that last winter I had my apimate colonies here in the backyard, and I had not treated them. I had neglected them. And now it was late November, December. I'm sure they weren't brooded all the way down though, but I hit them, I think 4 or 5 weeks in a row. And the apimate hives are interesting because they have the tray on the bottom. And so you can just clean it, treat, and pull it out and see in a few days how many mites have dropped. And I think I had the first 2 times I did that, the first 2 weeks on one particular colony, I think I had probably hundreds, if not thousands of mites. It was horrible. And then I went ahead and continued to treat, and each week it got to be a little bit less and a little bit less until at the end there were almost no mites. And so, but I hit them. It was an experiment just to see, but it was in the wintertime now. So there wasn't a lot of brood in there. I'm sure there was still some. And so that, I didn't take it out. I didn't go through the entire colony and see, but I just know that most of the colonies down here do have some brood. But it was an interesting experiment I did, but I hit them over and over and over again. But now I did wait. I usually have a 3-day weekend, and so I can hit them either the 5th day or the 7th day after I treat the previous time. And so it was between 5 and 7 days. I think I hit them 5 or 6 weeks in a row, but it took a while. It did just happen with 1 or 2 treatments. And that's what people ask me sometimes on my channel, how many times do I need to treat with oxalic acid? And I'm like, I guess if they're totally broodless, maybe once or twice, but sometimes, I think hitting them 3 or 4 times, I always try to do that if I can. And, but it's just down here, they start taking off so fast. Like right now, my bees are building up that it's just hard to keep up. It's hard to figure it out. Before you know it, it goes from, their lowest point December to all of a sudden now beginning of February, and they are just double deeps packed with bees. I've slowed down because we're just barely starting to get drones. I need to split them, but they're going to have drones and be in the trees like overnight because it just happens so fast here. And so I know it's incredibly different, but the bee basics are the same wherever you are. And so,
and you're monitoring too, so that helps you figure out what's going on, right? I think making assumptions is the worst thing beekeepers do a lot of the time, is just following through with an action and not following up to see if that action actually worked, because sometimes it doesn't. Then we got to sort ourselves through those situations. But I got to run. I got to take off here. I appreciate the sounding board, guys. This has been, I don't know if it's useful for anybody else, but it's useful for me anyways. It's quite intimidating to, express concern like this and not really knowing what's going on and asking for guidance. And I just want, one thing I just want to mention to maybe some of the beekeepers listening here. This conversation is going on with professional beekeepers. The same kind of questions I'm bringing up here and this kind of unknown territory that we seem to be in. A lot of beekeepers will provide you with the impression that they know what they're doing and they know what's going on. That's all bullshit. When they actually get to you and start talking to you honestly, they're scrambling and they're asking for those answers just the same as what I did here. and they're all conveying this information in this kind of, is it right, is it not right kind of platform, because nobody really knows what's going on, because there's so many things involved with controlling the mites. We're trying to control a bug on a bug, right? It's just like, how do you do that effectively, and how do you manage all those casualties? How do we manage on scale? How do we fit it within our philosophies and all this? So it's a conversation everybody's having. So we can't be afraid to reach out and ask questions and look for guidance in using these products, because it's very important we use them properly. And I'm sure we'll figure it out. It's just we need a collaboration like this. I guess what I'm getting at, collaboration like this is good, because we can put it out in the open, and maybe we can learn from mistakes. Like Greg, you made some terrible mistakes here.
I got
Hopefully I
really
don't
good
follow
at those
suit.
ones. Yeah, exactly. That's
So I can
definitely
use
what
your
it's all
mistakes.
about.
Maybe
Yeah.
I can
Make
maybe
your
see.
own. Yeah, go make some new ones, and then you'll tell us all about those, and we'll just keep tightening up this mistake curve, hopefully, you know. But that's what it's all about. Ian, thanks for joining us here on the Nature's Image Farm podcast, the Nature's Image Farm YouTube channel, the Stream Team Beekeeping Chat. We're going to continue this conversation tonight. We're going to get into the lethality of oxalic acid, how much oxalic is too much, and can you run some bees out? We're going to keep that conversation going. But Ian, thanks again for joining us tonight. We're looking forward to seeing what strategic plan you put together for the rest of this year. And one little bug I want to put in your ear to keep an eye on is, I think there's something going on where we're finding some colonies are washing zeros, and some colonies are washing 30% or 25%. And for some reason, those colonies just keep plugging away. There's something else going on here with viral loads, viral expressions, and how that imparts onto the bees. And I want to have that conversation with you like this again, maybe this time next year. But for now, thanks for joining us.
And then tie nutrition into the conversation.
Oh, boy.
This is where beekeeping gets interesting. There's so many aspects we can talk about, right? And this is why these conversations always last 3.5 hours.
Right. Thanks for your time
Anyway,
tonight, Ian.
Yeah, I got to run. So thanks, guys. We'll see
Ian,
you.
take care.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. Wow.
Well, this is where the thinking gets done. And this is where it's important for a lot of folks to have these conversations and be open with failure, what seems like failure, and be able to share, what seems like a terrible mistake. I'm all about, we're speaking at the Honey in the Hills, the West Virginia Beekeeping Association conference here coming up in March. You can go to Mountaineer beekeeping.com. We'll get some links. But what's going to be interesting is what I like to do at when I'm speaking with bee clubs, or at a conference, is I like to share the hard lessons learned. It's easy to get up here and say, I did all these things great. And I think there's so much bias when we think we're successful, and how we share that message, that information to me is nowhere near as useful as someone who said, I don't know why, I don't know how, but I just murdered a bunch of bees. Here's what I did. Let's talk this through. And let's try to find the strategy to do better. I think that is the gold in the sluice of the mind, where when you start to pan it out, these things happen. There's a lot of nuggets that we just pulled together collectively, and I think there's going to be a lot more conversations that a lot of us are going to have moving forward with it. Before we get going, we do have a giveaway tonight on a hand-forged hive tool from Tim Byrne Jr. We've got that to do, and guys, before we move on, any initial quick takeaways from our talk with Ian so far? Ryan?
My takeaway is, don't get static. Always be willing to adapt. And that's what I've learned. If you get, so to say, too comfortable and you get yourself into just a static rhythm, it's probably not going to turn out good. So, always just keep yourself informed, keep yourself up to date. So I do want to share one thing, though, and that is this right here. This is the model that Ian was talking about, and then he also had in his last video for anybody that did see it. I'll send the link of where I found this This is Randy Oliver's, model. That way Greg can plug it in the video. So if anybody is curious about that model and they want to use it, I'll make sure that Greg has the link so that you all can download it.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, that's I enjoyed that. If you haven't seen that video, go check out Ian's channel. You can see him work through mentally plugging this in, taking this out, and seeing the curve. It's a big deal to visually see these things sometimes. And those models are helpful just to give us a little bit more, I don't want to say confidence or courage to maybe take a different approach. But it keeps the gears in the mind working to say, okay, well, maybe if I do this, maybe if I do that, maybe this will be a big difference. Have you guys ever heard of a lethal dose of oxalic acid to your bees? Have you heard of anyone killing or running their bees out with oxalic? If in the comments here, everyone listening, if you're listening on the Nature's Image Farm podcast, thank you. If you're going to check out this, the replay post on the Nature's Image Farm YouTube channel, let us know in the comments. And if you're listening tonight live, let us know in the comments, have you ever killed your bees with oxalic acid? And if so, what happened? It's not something that's really talked about a whole lot. But like I mentioned earlier, operating in complete transparency, I've gotten fantastic at murdering mites, but I've got even better at murdering bees. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that tonight so that we are painting an accurate picture of all of the products that we use. So it doesn't look like we're just, favored to one method. Have you guys ever killed bees with oxalic acid? Brian, have you?
So this is full transparency. I take it. So when I very first used oxalic acid, I did not, well, let me back up. I used spot on what the label says at the interval that at that point we were provided with. We were given information that said use this dose at this interval. Here's oxalic acid. I did that. It did not work. Last year, I used 2 caps. So we all know how much is in a blue cap, but I used 2 caps on every hive at intervals of 4 to 5 days, and I did like 6 treatments. So they got, you do the math.
Grams. How many grams of bees?
They got 10. Well, they were double deeps. So in double deeps, they got 10 grams, and there might have been a little bit of a bulge on the top. So they might have gotten 11 or 12 grams.
Okay.
And that
so
is
1 to
100%
1.5 grams per frame.
Yep.
How'd that do?
And I had 0 issues.
Yeah.
And we all know, like sitting right now, my colonies are 11 for 11.
So no death or any problems using oxalic. Nope. Bruce, what about you?
If anything, I would kind of go the opposite end of that. If I've probably traditionally used, kind of like Brian said, per label, and I've increased that amount. I don't know that I've ever done as much as what I don't know if I've ever done 2 complete caps, basically 10 grams per colony, but I've never had issues that I know of killing bees. Unless you consider the bees that maybe died because it wasn't on an effective treatment. So I have not seen any particular issues with that. One thing I will say that is interesting to me is, I don't know if you've ever, I'm sure you have, just kind of tipped the lid of a hive right after you treat. And it's very interesting to me. It's almost like the bees are drugged. Like they just, they'll get a little bit feisty or fired up right when you're doing it. But if you tip that lid maybe a couple minutes after you treat and you look in there, they're fanning, but they seem like it almost drugs them. They're calm, and it's kind of neat. But I've never had a lot of issues or any issues that I know of by either absconding or killing bees by using higher doses. Currently with the INSTANTVAP, I've been using 3 to 4 grams on my colonies. Most of them, if it's a nuke, I drop it down a little bit, but I haven't had any issues. It just seems to really fumigate them. And I guess I could treat them twice to get more, but that's just kind of what I've been doing. The single deeps or the deep and mediums, I'll use, 3 grams typically, and then I'll go up to 4 grams if it's anything more than that. So that's kind of what I've been doing. And I think it's been effective. I haven't done a ton of mite counts recently, but the ones I've done seem to be pretty good.
So no loss with you either.
Nope. Greg, how about you?
Well, I got a lot of comments here on the live. This live chat is, I don't see a single person who's commented. Everyone says no, 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 never killed him. No, 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 no. The list goes on and on. No.
Greg, I would say not that I know of. Now, I mean,
it's something and here. So I'm going to be. I've had a bad experience with the very old glow plug pan style vaporizers. I know a lot of folks who have murdered entire colonies catching them on fire. That aside, that's not an oxalic acid deal. That's an equipment deal. Using the Larabi's vaporizers that we love to use, and we've used them now for years. We have always used a blue cap, and as Brian made a good comment here. Let me see if I can find it. I don't think it goes without being said, but Brian wants to especially let it be known, just to go on the record, do not follow what I do in my apiary. I only recommend following the label. If you want a how-to, then you need to go see Mike Berry, and he'll let you know exactly how to. So we've used the standard and the macro Larabi's, and the instant vape is our new favorite way to administer oxalic acid vapor. With the standard and the macro Larabi's units, the blue caps hold 5 grams. I have just, for the sake of consistency, no matter if it's a 5-frame nuke, a 10-frame single, they always got blasted with a cap, just a complete cap. And I never had a single bit of problem. And I mean, never. Even a 5 grand cap on a 3-frame split that has a queen maybe soonly emerging, if it's a cell that's getting ready to hatch, not hatched yet, or she was already out and she was a virgin, no problems, 0 problems. But I have 100% found the lethal dose for oxalic acid. Brian, you talked about you were at 1.5 grams of oxalic acid per frame of bees or so. I think I don't even know what it's probably better we didn't have this conversation with Ian. He has a little bit more. Well, I'll say this: fringe treating has been in occurrence and has existed since we've been trying to figure this whole thing out. And it stems from farmers and bee farmers knowing that, hey, whatever they say to use isn't working. And so I'm going to tweak, I'm going to dabble, I'm going to do this. Now, whether you think that's right or wrong, I'm going to leave that judgment for you. But what I'm going to say is that we've always used, without even knowing, way higher doses of oxalic than even the recommended. It used to be 1 gram and now 2, and now we're flirting with 3 or maybe 4. The fact of the matter is we've been using 5 grams forever. And it's been working well. But it's been working well in the right context to where we're near broodlessness, we're broodless, or we're using to keep things static. That's where oxalic acid shines, where you can afford the time and the material to get in there and zap them. Okay, so what is the lethal dose of oxalic acid? Brian, you're at 1.5, no problem. Even if you're heavy and you're at 5 grams for a nuke, that's 1 on a 3-frame queen mating nuke, 1.2. So there completely falls, and I bear the burden. We had some fellas out helping us treat all of our colonies with oxalic acid, and I gave the instruction to give every colony a blue cap. Okay, but this is where, when you are having folks out working with you and you're delegating, that you have to be very clear on the instructions that you give, because when I say a blue cap per colony, what I should have said is a blue cap per box. Okay, why does that matter? Here's where the lethal dose for oxalic acid is for me. We raise queens like we learned from Chris Werner, and it is full size frames. We use a lot of 10 frame boxes that are divided into 3, where we'll have 3 mating nukes per 10 frame single. We've got big, beautiful queens that are mature. When we send them off, they are proven. They are laying up a storm. We've got frames of sealed brood. But here's the challenge with oxalic acid. The fellas did exactly what I asked them to. It was a 5-gram dose per colony. So in this situation, we were on the lean side of the population in each in one of those compartments. So in this configuration, we're talking about 9 frames total, each divided into its own compartment of 3 frames. Of those 3 frames, we may have only had a frame to a frame and a half of bees per colony, per compartment. So we gave 5 grams of oxalic acid for 1.5 frames of bees. So in total, we were at 1, you're at 3, you're at 4.5, you're at almost 4 to 5 frames of bees total on 15 grams of oxalic acid. So somebody do the math on that. That's 4, that is nearly 4 grams per frame of bees. Well, that's a heck of a lot more than the standard 2 to 4 grams for 10 frames of bees, isn't it? That's where we found some problems. We had colonies that were absolutely absconding. We had colonies that they just, it was almost as though the oxalic acid burned up some of those young queens because they were bad wrong, and eventually every single one of them collapsed or they got run off. And so the lethal dose, it was the lethality was absconding and complete loss of not only the queen, but all the bees on those frames. So you're talking a pretty significant loss in a mating yard where that happens. And then potential physical, it was almost as though the wings seemed singed from it. So yes, can you hurt your bees with oxalic acid? You 100% can, but don't be a knucklehead. If you're going to have folks out working with you, give some clear instructions. A 5-gram dose for 1.5 frames of bees in our context was too much. That was way too much. Of course, in hindsight, that makes sense. You know, that's a little too hot and heavy.
Greg, I think one clarification here is, we've talked about this before, but for new folks who may be on here, those who may not have heard it, I always thought that the blue cup was like 1 or 2 grams. So I was treating, I was stacking those things up, filling up, and then putting an extra little bit on there. Sometimes even I thought it was like 1 to 2 grams, but then you weighed it and I weighed it and we looked at the scale and it is 5 grams, which I was completely stunned by that. And so for folks who use any type of device that uses those blue caps or use it like the Larabis or a Jono's Easy Vape, anybody who uses those type of devices, just know that those cups are 5 grams. So it's it was a shocker to me. I didn't believe it, Greg. You told me, I'm like, there's no way that can't be 5 grams. And then you sent me a picture of it on a scale and I'm like, I'll be darned. And so then I'm like, I want to try my scale. And sure enough, it was. So
where that's important is I have never heard of a threshold that was actually too much for OAV. I've never heard it. I found it and I'm happy to share it. So 15 grams for about 3 to 4 frames of bees in total is way too much. So to say it again, 15 grams of oxalic acid for us was way too much for about almost 4 frames of bees total, maybe almost 5. Too much.
I would almost question that. I mean, if you're talking about 15 grams for that amount of bees, there's a stress factor there. So, with that colony that size and they can't properly,
vent it out.
Vent that
in one single box.
Whether it was oxalic acid or any other type of vapor, would that much vapor going into such a small colony cause an abscond regardless?
Well, and that's what we talked about it earlier, and I was hoping to bring Ian into that conversation, but you know how we get 2 hours long in a hurry. To value his time, I didn't want to drag that conversation on. But everything that we've done, thymol on a stress colony runs them out. Formic, of course, on a stress colony can run them out. Oxalic acid in this situation can run them out. Our buddy at Anil at NKY Honeybees, he thought 2 grams is fine. It is, but what we're talking about is 15 grams on one 10-frame box that's divided in 3, which in total only had about 4 frames of bees in total in that box. It's a 10-frame divided into 3. So you're getting 15 grams of oxalic acid circulating through that one box with that little bees in there. That seems to be the problem. And we have, it's probably a whole other show for another day on tips and tricks for using oxalic acid. We have used it in the bottom board. We've done it from on top, and there is a massive difference on what it seems to be effective. When we go and treat underneath on the bottom board, the vapor goes up and it kind of circulates and then it settles. When we go and then the bees are coated in it. When you crack the lid later, like Bruce mentioned, they're fanning. There is a lot of oxalic coverage from the bottom, but when we've tried to go through the top and do it, it's almost like we're not getting. I don't know if convection is the right word, but the circulation, the venting to go through the colony, it wants to shoot down and go out, and it doesn't really circulate through. And then we end up, some of it ends up on the bottom board or the sidewalls, but we got way less bee coverage with the oxalic acid crystals, or I guess it would be crystals, microcrystals that are left behind. Way less surface coverage on the bees, but more importantly on the frames. So that's just we could talk. That's a whole other night. So.
And not to keep going down this rabbit hole, but when I switched up my dosage, I would always treat before on my lower deep. You drill the little hole in. I switched that up this year because I run double deeps, so I would have the hole at the very bottom of my top deep. So it was almost, if you looked at that structure, I was almost hitting it directly in the middle.
Gotcha. Yeah, because you're under the bottom bar of the frame.
Yep. I was under the top frames and above my lower.
So it's blasting on the fronts of the box, and it's probably some's probably going up and over, and some's going down and over, and it's probably I could see that working. There's so many different ways to do all these treatments, including thymol and formic. Even there probably shouldn't be, but there is.
Yeah, one thing that that Ian mentioned was that his friend told him that I used to always block my colonies when I treated.
Yeah.
And then I kind of quit doing that because, man, it just feels, it's a lot. Vapor just flies everywhere out of those colonies with that instant vape that comes out through the top, and it cracks. It's just coming out of that colony like totally fumigated. So I just kind of quit worrying about blocking the entrance. So maybe I need to go back to doing that. It does take extra time to do that. It's an extra step. And maybe do you guys block yours? Brian, I think you do. Do you do that, Greg, as well?
Blue shop towels. I just have either a Pro Nuke or a Jester box stuffed with them, and we just zap them and close them up. And some of the videos this year, there was 2 times that I treated this year that I didn't use those. When we're using our NUCS, we're treating our NUCS or our queen NUCS that have dials on the front, entrance dials. I usually just put a cork over my instant vape and then go right in the entrance and then blast them, and they'll leave it alone. But on anything, we use all solid bottom boards, which I think is helpful, especially for these kind of situations. But on a pallet, I only have a 4-inch opening, and that's it. And so the INSTANTVAP fits almost perfectly.
That's true.
In that entrance. And so while I'm treating, there's not a lot going on. One quick blue shop towel as I pull it out. I just got to make sure you come pull them out. If you forget to pull them out, for the most part, the bees will wiggle their way through and can get in and out, but you don't want to leave those things.
My pellets have a little tiny crack in the back, I guess, for water drainage, like if you tilted, and so they can get in and out of there. But hopefully that doesn't happen if ever very often. So.
Well, we're almost 2 hours, guys. I want to thank everyone who's hung on this long. Thank Ian if he's listening back for his time. What do you guys say we go ahead and, as a way to say thanks for all the folks who have hung on this long, we go ahead and give away this hive tool. It is super beautiful. This camera is not going to do it justice, but look at these are all hand punched. Look at the texture on that. Absolutely gorgeous. The backside also has that classic rasp kind of texture.
Wow.
It does have
awesome.
Somebody was asking where they could get those. Is there a place they can
You can
go to order
get a
them?
hold of Tim Byrne Jr. On Facebook. Tim, if you're listening, I'll get with Tim. I'll get his email address, and if he wants, I know he's a farrier by trade, so I don't know that he's. When I asked him about that, he wasn't trying to go into business selling these. He was kind of doing it as a way to say thanks to the stream team for the content that we put out. I wanted to offer it to the audience. But Tim, if you ever change your mind, let me know. We'll drop the links in this video. But it is what's interesting about this is it's so comfortable. It sits in your hand perfectly, and it's just gorgeous. It is and it is not that heavy. It's not much heavier than a standard hive tool. So, anyways, beautiful work. Even has his name stamped in it. Tim Byrne. Look at that. So
That is
that's
awesome.
a classic.
Beautiful.
That's a classic.
It's
Piece
beautiful.
of art, piece of art, actually.
Yep. So you guys know the drill by now. Hashtag Hive Tool, and we'll get that shipped out to somebody. Again, I want to thank Tim Byrne Jr. For reaching out and giving to the folks here. I want to thank the folks who've also gave super chats tonight. I really do appreciate you doing that. As we always say, that money kind of just goes back into the stream team savings account for us all individually, and we use that money for giveaways and things like that. So I really do appreciate that. Brian, you want to go ahead and hit the
spin it?
Wheel of Fortune? Spin it.
I wanted to plug in a comment, but I held back. Wouldn't be fair.
Mr.
Gene Nelson.
Eugene Nelson, come on down.
Look at that. He's won stuff before.
Eugene.
That's awesome.
Okay. Eugene Nelson, what I'm going to ask you to do is go to our website at naturesimagefarm.com. Go to the contact tab. There you'll find our information. Reach out, and we will get this to you. That's super neat to be able to have something so cool to give away. You know, last time we gave away Yappy's traveling mug. We actually threw it at Brian. And if you guys remember how that ended, it ended up with me spilling a cup of coffee all over the place here. What a mess that was.
That mug might make another appearance on another stream next week.
Really?
It might. We'll see.
You just never know.
Yeah, you never know. You never know.
Guys, we're at 2 hours, and I'd love to talk all night about these things. Do you guys have any? What are you guys working on this week, Bruce?
I'm just trying to keep up, just trying to catch up. Just quickly, as far as videos go, I did post a short yesterday or last night of a crazy packed out colony that I've got that just really needs to be split. Now it's really not quite enough drones yet to use cells, but within a couple of weeks there's going to be drones everywhere. But the queen availability is an issue right now, and so I just can't do it yet. Our goal is to split starting the 1st of March. We've got some cells lined up for then, so I hope I can keep them in the box until then. But then after that, I went up and I've got a long form video coming out. It's it's probably 4 or 5 minutes long. It's not very long, maybe 6. I think it's like 4 or 5 minutes, but it's great. It's a video about the horizontal hive with one of your NUCS in there. And it's amazing the difference. That great big huge colony with probably 60,000 bees, and then the one that has yours in it, you'll see it's just they're all condensed in a little small cluster.
Yep.
It kind of scares me. I mean,
Yep.
honestly, I'm scared about it, but we'll see how they do coming out when that flow really kicks in. We'll see how they do. I've seen small like Carniolan genetics before and how they get small, but this is, you can see if you watch the video. So if you see the video, don't think there's anything wrong with that colony, because I think that's what they're supposed to do, right, Greg?
That's it.
But
That's
I hope it picks up, and I do have several of Greg's queens, as you know, and they're kind of at various levels. But I think there has been some different flows happening in different bee yards that I have as well, because some of them are busy and building up, and others are not as much. And so it's amazing how within a few miles you can have a completely different timing on some things. And so that'll be interesting. Hopefully you guys will check it out. And if you have any ideas or things you'd like to see on my channel, if you could just leave it in the comments or email me, and I'll try to get them done for you. But really, as far as the bees go, just trying to make sure, hopefully get everything in order, because within a month from now, it's going to be just full out bee season here in this part of the country.
Man,
we're right there at it, but man, we're just so close. We get more drones and we're going to start seeing bees in the trees, and I'll start getting calls real soon.
Cool. Brian, what's new for you coming up this week?
Probably not much. This weekend will be my 2-week mark, so that's about my rotation that I have set every 14 days, just checking the fondant on the colony. So I'll be able to update everyone next week. If they're still 11 for 11. I've kind of decided on the number that I'll have for this next year. So everybody's going to hear it right here on the Nature's Image Farm podcast, YouTube channel, stream team chat. It's probably going to be 15. I don't want to expand that. See there? See that?
Good job, Brian.
I don't want to expand that much where I don't want to add any more time to the bees than what I already have. I'm trying to regulate my time. But what I'm going to do, and probably my challenge, and I know I'm going to have more than just that when I do splits and just managing swarms and things like that, but I'm probably going to end up setting up a little bit of a nuke yard just so that, I can kind of manage my numbers. And then I'm probably going to find people that can take some nukes from me. So I guess it's a problem to
Great
have.
dog talk, Brian. You're stepping out. That's good. That's good, man. It's fun to stretch yourself and do some different things. So that's cool.
Yeah.
It might be more difficult to try and figure out how to keep a smaller number of colonies than to grow, though, honestly. But yeah, to try and get rid of them, and it might be easier just to let them grow and just grow your numbers. Those bees, when they multiply, they multiply. But if you can find a place to put them, that's a great plan there to go ahead and just find homes for the others.
Yeah, that's all.
Yep.
So
that's awesome. The next stream team chat will be on whose channel next Wednesday? Who's next?
Right.
Is it? I think it's mine.
It is.
Cool.
Yeah. So,
awesome. I know this Sunday night. Stay tuned to the Nature's Image Farm YouTube channel. Susie and I will be doing a show this Sunday night at 8 p.m. where we're going to be talking about spring prep. If you are not already planning for spring, you might find yourself in a pinch, chasing your tail. There's a lot to talk about. So getting prepped and prepared for spring. Susie and I are going to talk about it. So come join us at the Nature's Image Farm YouTube channel, live chat, 8 p.m., the Homestead Chat with Greg and Susan. This episode here, number 37 with Ian Steppler, best Mite Treatments, is going to be available on the Nature's Image Farm podcast. And also this replay is going to be posted to our YouTube channel. There's going to be a lot of information to take away from tonight's conversation. And I think how we all apply that, we're going to start. It's going to be interesting to see what happens coming up. We had nearly 300 folks on tonight. So I want to thank everybody for the comments, for joining, for spending this kind of time with us. What that says about the community is that we're all looking to do better. We're all trying to find ways to continue to tune up our programs and do what's right by the bees. And so I want to thank everybody for not only their efforts in doing that, but for all of your support. It really does mean a lot. Got to thank our buddy Brian at Castle Hives for the super chat, Bruce for your super chat, and we had another one that came through earlier today.
I think it was Matt Kirkland. Matt
Kirkland. That's it. Yeah, Matt Kirkland. Thanks a lot for that too. I really do appreciate you guys. So that's what's going on. So stay tuned to the Bruce's Bees YouTube channel, the Castle Hives YouTube channel, the Nature's Image Farm YouTube channel, and if you we're going to talk about spring prep, especially in the bee yard, this Sunday night at 8 p.m. And we're going to get into it. In the meantime, if you are looking for packages, nukes, or queens, you can visit us at nature'simagefarm.com. We still have some queen availability for June. We have packages for sale, 3-pound packages, and also we've got our 5-frame nukes. So don't wait too long. Get in there while you can. We also are going to have the Premier Pura boxes unassembled. We're going to have them wax dipped. If you want them painted and assembled, we can ship out skids. And if you're looking for Premier Foundation assembled frames with the foundation in it, we can help you out there too. There's a lot of things you're going to see on our website, including the brand spanking new Instant Vape that has the voltage regulation in it, the battery protection right in the unit, available on our website too. So anyways, you can see that and more at naturesimagefarm.com. I appreciate all you guys. And you guys really make this whole thing special. It's not a single one of us just want to get on here and just talk for the sake of it. But when we're sharing the dialogue, when we're being transparent with our experience, and that we're all working together to do better, I think that really makes a big deal. So I'm going to thank you guys again for watching. Thanks to Tim Byrne Jr. For donating that hive. And of course, our friend Ian Steppler for spending the evening with us talking about strategy and mite treatments. So until the next time, as always, remember to be the lighthouse and be the change you want to see in this world. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.
Good stuff, man.